Okay, everybody. Glad that everybody is back, has a coffee, has like some food. We're gonna continue with like session 2 on like blockchain technology and decentralized science. And I'm very happy to have Tim here, who is an assistant professor at Washington University in St. Louis, where his research explores aging and mental health with molecular and computational approaches. And he's also like one of the stewards at the longevity working group at DAO, which is like a crypto longevity project. And in his talk, the incentives behind scientific progress, he will dive into like alternative business models. And yeah, let's welcome him, give him a hand, and have a listen.
Hey everyone, thanks. Very excited to be here. Thanks to Max and Morton and all the organizers. Really grateful for the opportunity to speak today. So yeah, today the title of our talk is pretty broad. I'm representing DAO today. So DAO is a funding collective, but we happen to use cryptocurrency, and hopefully throughout the course of this talk and through the session we'll be able to explain to you more details about crypto and blockchain and Web3 and all these terminologies you may have heard in the news. And you know, like Max was saying, you know, there's somewhat of a not ideal narrative around what crypto is and how it can be useful. And I think probably one of the key words, the key kind of concepts that I think has really been really powerful to me since I've been in this space for almost about 10 years now is just incentives and the alignment of incentives. We're all familiar in science about how there's several problems with science and how it progresses. And I'll like to share some ways that we're tackling this at DAO within this DeSci community, decentralized science community. So we're a funding collective, so we're mainly focusing on funding. So I do want to kind of run through some of the big headlights that people think about when they think about how do we do science. And so, as you're probably all familiar, you know, it's kind of broken at several steps or kind of impaired at several steps. So in terms of funding, there's of course lack of funding in many places, particularly at the government or nonprofit level. A lot of people lament the lack of innovation, you know, the kind of funding the safe stuff rather than the moonshots. In terms of publishing, which is all we'll talk about in our demo, but we won't focus on here today. There's of course the values not being captured by the scientists. Yes, we do get, you know, some label behind our publication, but for the most part, we're doing all the work. For the journals, are a lot of the hard work, of course, peer reviewing the work, and it's we're not really not capturing much of that value there. And then, of course, fortunately, the data is now going to be public. You know, the White House just released this, in the United States, just released this, made this mandate that by 2026, all the publications should be available immediately. But you know, there's of course many ways in which the data is still kind of locked down, and there's many flaws in the publishing system. And then DAO, we're mainly interested in commercializable research. We do some kind of nonprofit funding, but mainly interested in this kind of valley of death. So getting the basic science, you know, into the clinic, and so this translational step is key to us. And so we're all familiar with, you know, having done stuff in cells and animals and translated like Alex outlined earlier, you know, this kind of this timeline and pipeline to get things to the clinic. It's, you know, slow and costs a lot of money, and it's actually taking more and more time every year. So a lot of challenges there. So in terms of the solution, we think Web3, the kind of the third iteration of the web is part of that solution. So at a very basic level, you're probably familiar, of course, cryptocurrency is a currency. So tokens are kind of things that we and other organizations have created that allow kind of a new form of liquidity, a new form of money to be created that helps as a funding source. So that's kind of a pretty basic level. I think hopefully everyone understands. The blockchain's kind of also an overly hyped term, and it, you know, maybe not clear to you how that differs from just an Excel spreadsheet or you know, or a MySQL database or any of these other kinds of databases that you're using in your day jobs. But blockchains have several, you know, very interesting features that make for you know, superior solutions in some cases. Of course, there's the you know, the information's decentralized, so it's, you know, spread out a bunch of servers, not just one place. It's not siloed off. So that leads to greater permanence, and of course it's monetized. There's tokens associated with it. And we're using this, so I won't talk about this right now, but like I said, in our hands-on demo, we've created this service, TLDR, the Longevity Decentralized Review, where we're kind of tackling some issues in publishing, and we'll go through that and how we're using the blockchain for that. And I think the other big thing that's tied in with this is we're all representing different institutions, but really one of the key narratives of crypto is peer-to-peer. So you're not relying on your institution it's permissionless. You're not relying on anyone else to make something happen for you. You can really interact, peer-to-peer to get things done. And I think particularly in terms of business, again, with your institution, it's very slow to kind of work with your institution to bootstrap a business, and so we think this is better done peer-to-peer, and I'll go through what we call DTT, Decentralized Tech Transfer, as an approach there. Okay, so just in terms of commercialization, really the status quo. If you're not familiar with this, hopefully this will be informative. Definitely please do ask questions if it is not that familiar to you. So at all of our institutions, we have tech transfer offices. And these are great, full of wonderful people, lawyers and scientists, and who are often willing to help. But the issue is, they're kind of acting in the institution's best interest, not necessarily in your best interest. Of course, they want to help you along the way, but the mothership is the priority. So the people who are actually doing the inventions are kind of deprioritized in this process, and the institutions take different percentages of of your inventions, anywhere a third on up to a half or more, a large percentage of the invention is kind of just taken from you in the process of doing your inventive work. I think one of the biggest issues is that the resources are wasted. So we like to think of ourselves as very talented people, and we're creating novel things all the time. And for the most part, the tech transfer office, this is really it's kind of all of us. There's no really fingers to be pointed here. So I think we're all responsible for this not coming to fruition. But just the resources, we're not doing a great job of getting these inventions out into the world. So yes, the TTO officials, they're not incentivized, but we're not getting our work out there. And so in general, most of the work is sitting on the shelf in the TTO offices. It's just not getting monetized, and so that doesn't benefit the world, doesn't benefit us. So I think we need to do better on that. And of course, ultimately the mission is accomplished. So if you don't make patents, you don't commercialize your work, the world doesn't benefit. So the public health mission that we're all ascribing towards is ultimately not accomplished. And I think a big part of it is actually, even though, like I said, I'm a huge fan of our own TTO office, many have a lot of great colleagues and friends in there, they're not actually as knowledgeable as people. If you have business background, you would kind of readily see this. But it's, universities are nonprofit organizations, so they're not equipped with people typically that have a ton of business experience, and so we could do better in kind of having more business-minded people working at the TTO office and helping the scientists kind of realize the value of their work. Okay, so at Dainow we kind of came up with this concept of decentralized tech transfer. This could be applied to anyone. Can really use this. Just really it's kind of a basic framework. And so the basic point of it is that we're always looking for researchers. So the priority is on the people, not necessarily on where they came from or whatever it is. We're just always looking for great people, talented people who want to bring their talents to the world. So focus on the researchers themselves, not on the institution. And so what we're doing ultimately is we're asking researchers to be a consultant on a project to essentially form a new company where they set the terms. Really, their institution is not involved. So, and at this institution, we're going to form the IP. At the new company, we're going to form the IP. So it's really outside of the jurisdiction of the research institution. We don't want to say I mean, ultimately this is kind of disintermediating our own institutions, and I think that's, it's only fair if we're doing all the work. So it's really the active participants, anyone who wants to get involved can do it, and we're just creating a kind of a network of newcos formed by talented researchers around the world. So of course, and then the upside is democratized, so anyone is part of a DAO, it's decentralized, anyone can join, permissionless environment. Anyone who participates in the newco can get upside in what we're doing. Okay, and so the unique advantages of this DTT model, so it's greater efficiency. So we don't wait on the TTOs. We form the newco, work with the researchers. We do the new experiments that are generating the IP at this newco or with CROs and other organizations where there's no kind of intellectual property disputes. So it's much more efficient. No waiting around for lengthy legal contracts. Of course, then the funds are spent more digitally. I think overhead rates at many institutions are very large. So if you give an institution $250,000, over half of that will be taken up in just overhead or fees. So all that $250,000 will be just spent on the experiments themselves and the IP generation, not on overhead. The other big buzzword in crypto is this idea of composability. So again, I represent DAO, but the whole point is that there should be kind of integration between different parts, and people should be able to kind of freely come and go from the parts, because everything's essentially on the blockchain, and anyone can access the blockchain, anyone can transact on it. So as opposed to what we're currently doing, where everyone has their own kind of proprietary information and it's all kind of siloed off in kind of databases that that only certain people have access to. What we're doing is creating a network where anyone can kind of hopefully highly interoperable network of companies and value creation that is highly composable and can change and is very fluid. And then lastly, we hope to kind of make this very automated. So, a big part of everything of what we do these days is really offline. I mean, I know the last session was all about AI and bringing things into the cloud and stuff like that, but most of the actual kind of the grunt work, the administrative part is all offline. And so, of course, this would be made much faster if we brought, application submission, project reviewing, funding decisions, and then project management all on chain, and of course smart contracts, essentially contracts which have the logic for how all this stuff will fit together. That can all be done all on chain and in an automated fashion where there's no disputes about what happens. And just to kind of make it quite tangible, so we're very fortunate to announce that Vera Gorbanova at the University of Rochester is kind of our first kind of example of this. So she's I'm sure you're all familiar, a leader in the geroscience space. So we formed this company, Matrix Pharma, or Matrix Biopharma, and we're targeting extracellular matrix, and we're going to be funding her with $250,000. We're going to package the IP into an NFT. I hope you may have heard of those. Those are non-fungible tokens, so the actual IP will be kind of encoded in the blockchain, if you will. And of course, we can generate many patents, but that's the basic idea. And so that's going to be one of our first projects. And there's several other researchers we've been negotiating with to kind of join in this project. And so, and like I said, it's open for anyone to participate. So if you're interested, please do reach out to us about this project. So pretty excited about it. And then I didn't talk about the TLDR service, but essentially, in summary, what we're hoping to do with the DTT model is to create a more time and cost-efficient and composable path, interoperable path to commercializing our research. And then same with in other places where there's kind of a lack of incentives. In this case, TLDR, we're tackling publishing. And so we have governance proposals, or all of our work, what we do is online and at gov.vitadao.com, or you can go and weigh in on kind of how this stuff is playing out and vote with your tokens. So, I'd just like to acknowledge several people that made this possible. Tyler Galato, Sebastian Brunmeyer, who's speaking next, we're key in kind of incubating this DTT concept. Lawrence Ion, Paulo Benetti, who's also in the room here, Reese Anderson, Tyler Stahl, others. A lot of good discussions about creating some of these new frameworks. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Tim, for the introduction on that topic. We have time for one question. Anybody want to have a go? Otherwise, in Slack. Here in the back.
You have some problem with some tech transfer offices if the researchers, get paid by the university and sell their technology on the side. How do you solve that?
Yeah. So that's really thank you. That's the key issue with all this. It depends on the institution. To some extent, we can act as consultants. In other cases, the university owns your brain. So you really can't do anything without their permission. I'd argue that's not a very fair system. So I'd argue, hopefully there's some ways to change that. But yeah, it's going to be highly dependent on whatever your contract is, and to the extent that your institution owns your brain. But I think that's unfair. So I think there's this expression right about proceed, ask for forgiveness later, that kind of thing, where you just kind of go forward. That's how innovation happens, right? You just proceed and then hope for the best. So yeah, I think that's how it should go. Yep.
Perfect. Thanks for the question. Yep. I guess you can't make an omelette without breaking some eggs.
Definitely.
I guess that goes in the same direction,
exactly.
Right?
Yep.
So next on stage we have Sebastian Brunmeyer, who is a biotech VC and company builder focused on longevity and regenerative medicine. He's the co-founder and general partner of Healthspan Capital, a VC fund, and he's the CEO and founder of ImmuneAge Pharma, a company focused on immune system rejuvenation. And in the crypto space, he's also advising Molecule and VitaDAO. And you should always really listening to Sebastian, because it's he's combining the two worlds from crypto and has all the biotech understanding, and usually brings it across in a very, very nice way that everybody understands it. And he will be talking about concepts of research financing through IP NFTs and how the current biopharma system is broken. So welcome, Sebastian.
Is this thing on? Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thanks to the conference organizers for the invitation. This is shaping up to be, I think it's the largest, but probably one of the best longevity conferences in the world. Yeah, this headset is great because I can move around and gesticulate and even dance. I feel like Beyonce, or maybe longevity's Justin Bieber is more appropriate. But anyway, so I will talk to you guys about something that is outside of my normal wheelhouse a little bit, which is Web3, crypto, and new approaches to funding science using these tools. Before I get into that, I want to, okay, you can see my cursor here. I want to talk to you about a new term called long bio. So this is already being used by people in the know, but I think it's a useful way to define longevity biotech as a thing in the eyes of investors and people who want to come work in the field. An example of this, a precedent, is synthetic biology, which went by synbio and became very hot and almost bubblicious. So anyway, feel free to use the term long bio. I think it'll help out the field. So here's the overview of the presentation, a bit about my own background in Healthspan Capital, overview of the longevity biotech ecosystem, Web3 architecture for financing biotech, VitaDAO, which is the first longevity DAO and one of the most interesting bio-DAOs out there, which Tim just spoke a bit about the mechanics. Molecule AG and the IP NFT model. This is a new tool for financing research and basically transacting IP that they invented. And then an invitation to join the revolution. So a bit about myself. Who am I? I look myself in the mirror every day and ask that question. But for the purposes of this talk, I'm a biomedical scientist by training. I've been in longevity biotech for about 10 years now, affiliated with a bunch of different academic institutions, and I transitioned into the biotech space, first with Apollo Health Ventures, which is one of the first and today the largest aging-focused venture funds in the world, and they're primarily a company builder, and they have $200 million under management. I think they're the second coolest longevity fund out there after Healthspan Capital, of course. I launched the first biotech company I launched is called Samsara Therapeutics. It's based in Oxford, UK, and it is today the largest drug discovery platform company for autophagy enhancement. So the scientists among us will know autophagy well. It's been proposed as one of the missing hallmarks of aging. And basically, it's a mechanism by which fasting and exercise confer their health benefits. So if you genetically ablate or inhibit autophagy, fasting and exercise do not extend the lifespan of animals. And they're hiring. If you're UK-based, get in touch. The next company that I launched is called Cambrian Biopharma, which is today one of the largest companies in the longevity space. It's based on something we call a DISCO model, so a distributed drug discovery model, which allows us to package together a lot of different single assets into one and have a shared team across them. And that's raised about 160 million, and we've got a rockstar team mostly in New York. And today, I help run a fund called HealthSpan Capital. We invest in longevity and regenerative medicine. And I'm also helping launch a company called ImmuneAge Pharma, an immune system rejuvenation, targeting the hematopoietic stem cells. But mostly today I'm going to talk about crypto stuff, Web3 stuff, VitaDAO, which Tim talked about a little bit just now, Molecule, which is based in Switzerland, which is sort of building the infrastructure for BioDAOs, the Web3 picks and shovels approach, as well as LabDAO, which is one of the coolest new DAOs. Briefly about HealthSpan, this is the team. Many of us are actually here today, so come say hi to us if you're a biotech founder or investor. These are some of our advisory board members who you'll recognize, and we have, I think, a really excellent team with affiliations with leading academic institutions, VCs, companies, big pharmas, et cetera, et cetera. So get in touch if you're a company founder. This is our current portfolio. We started under a year ago, but we've deployed capital into all of these companies, so definitely check them out. All right, so a landscape of the overall long bio ecosystem. So this comes from the website called Longevity List, which comes from my invincible partner, Nathan Chang. And he basically has data on all of, or almost all of the longevity biotech companies, investors, and clinical trials, and is tracking the capital going into this space. And it's increasing exponentially. At least those companies that are self-consciously referring to themselves as longevity companies. Not all of them truly qualify, and we'll get into that. So here's a snapshot from his website. You can see a lot of information about all the companies and investors, clinical trials, job postings, which is important to this conference. Many of you are scientists. And you should also sign up for his excellent Longevity Market Cap newsletter, which I believe is the largest newsletter in the space. So who are some of the leading investors and company builders? This is not an exhaustive list, of course, but these are some of the more prominent ones. These ones are the ones I am or have been affiliated with in the top, but definitely get in touch with the rest. This I call my social proof slide. So many investors are kind of like lemmings. They want to ask, all right, what other smart people have invested in X? And so you can see here, this is just a small sampling of the very smart money that has gone into the space. My personal favorite is probably Stanley Druckenmiller, who is the most successful macro hedge fund manager probably of all time, who worked with Soros. So he, working with Soros, broke the British pound back in the day. And a bunch of big pharmas are getting into this space too. And Pfizer may or may not, you didn't hear it from me, may or may not be announcing an entry into the longevity space in the next several months as one of their therapeutic areas of interest. So here are some of the companies in the space. This, again, is far from an exhaustive list. The publicly listed, privately held, founded by me, and some founded by Apollo Health Ventures. So definitely check these out if you want to invest in them or you want to work with them. All right, so taking a step back, giving an overview of the biopharma machine. So this I call a wiring diagram of the biomedical economy. So we can zoom in. It all starts with the public. Through taxes, they pay into the NIH. This is about $50 billion a year today. It goes to research institutes, as you all know. The IP resulting from that research is turned into biotech startups, venture capital funds when they're doing the company builder model like Apollo or Cambrian, which is not a fund. Also access that talent. They purchase equity from these companies. There's also another source of capital, which is the risk capital. So these are LPs and funds, public market investors, who supply capital to VCs and directly into biotech startups. Those biotech startups today do the bulk of all early stage R&D. So preclinical and early stage clinical R&D is now largely outsourced to biotechs, whereas 30 years ago plus, it was mostly still done in-house by big pharma, and we'll get into some of the dynamics behind that. And then big pharma and everybody else contracts with these CROs, contract research organizations, preclinical and clinical, like Evotech or Charles River. The data are supplied back to the companies and reviewed by the regulators. The regulators choose to approve or not, and then there's another layer of quality control, which is the payers, like insurance or governments, who decide to pay or not, like the case of Aduhelm, in which that did not occur, thankfully, the Alzheimer's drug that doesn't work. And then the final layer is prescribers, so doctors prescribing to their patients, and it's somewhere around $1 trillion a year in drug sales globally. So there's some bad news in the field, which is that big pharma is basically burning their investors' capital. So their IRR, their internal rate of return, is less than their weighted average cost of capital, which just means their internal R&D is garbage, and it's been declining for some reason. And there are a lot of theories as to why this may be. I would direct you to HealthSpan Capital advisor Jack Scannell, who coined the term E-Rooms law, which is the inverse of Moore's law. Gordon Moore is one of the co-founders of Intel, and he showed that the pace of semiconductor processing speed was increasing exponentially. Well, it's actually the inverse of that, where for pharma internal R&D pipelines, it's exponentially more expensive to get a new drug approved. They're also overestimating the costs for various reasons, but it's an issue. So why might this be? Well, big pharma is historically asleep at the wheel. So to quote Jürgen Drews, former head of R&D at Roche, the biotech industry is increasingly taking up what the pharma industry is neglecting, carrying out future-directed research, creating the conditions for the discovery of new classes of medicines that attack more directly the root causes of disease. That sounds like long bio to me. Regarding the biotech revolution of the 90s, according to David Baltimore, who's the president of Caltech, Nobel laureate, one of the greatest scientists of his generation, pharma was asleep at the wheel, unable to understand the profound opportunities provided by molecular biology and therefore unable to take advantage of them. Though they're a little faster on the uptake with long bio, fortunately. So I want to share some data from Andrew Lo, who is one of my favorite professors in the world at MIT, and he basically analyzes everything that's going on in the biotech or in the biopharma space. And what he showed was that in the year 2000, of the top 30 best-selling drugs, 4 of 30 came from biotechs. Whereas if you fast forward to 2018, it's even more the case today, of the best-selling top 30 drugs, 80% came from biotechs and academic spin-outs. So this is good for all of us who are in the company building game. But there's a big problem for society, which is there's this bottleneck. There's not enough throughput of production of new biotech spin-outs. There's also some very, very good news, which is the rate of clinical trial success across all stages of clinical trials and all therapeutic areas, this data also comes from Andrew Lo's group, is increasing rapidly. In the last 3 or 4 years, it's nearly tripled. So if you thought that the biotech bubbleiciousness of the last couple of years was unjustified, this may be one of the factors that's actually justifying it fundamentally. And so why is this happening? Well, Andrew Lo himself says it's probably due to more academic drug discovery and biotech spinouts and new modalities like gene therapy and targeting the diseases in which the pathology is clear, the molecular etiology is clear, like rare genetic diseases. And the first company that was created that was inspired by Andrew Lo's mega fun thinking here is BridgeBio, and another one is Cambrian, which is focused on this approach in longevity. All right, so switch gears here to talk a bit about Web3, and let me just first share with you some poetry and limericks while I have your attention. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so as good scientists, Let's run an experiment. What if we could combine the disco model of biopharma, like what Cambrian is, with DAOs, Web3, and crypto markets for early liquidity and raising capital rapidly? So there's a new movement called DeSci, Decentralized Science, really launched in the last 2 years, I would say. One of the key initiator organizations is Molecule, based in Switzerland. You should check them out. But it's been a long time coming. There are these cloud labs as well that basically perform experiments virtually without anybody having to be right there at the bench. But when we combine this with new funding capabilities that are enabled by Web3 and crypto, we can do something quite amazing. So anyway, check out some of these organizations when you can. So what is DeSci? This is a definition I came up with about a year ago, which is it's a new paradigm to discover, disseminate, fund, and execute scientific research without relying on governments, big corporations, or centralized organizations. The on-chain IP resulting from this research can be fractionalized and liquidly traded in a manner more transparent than the current IP market structure. Companies and labs can also be financed on-chain via DAOs, and we've done this recently. The DeSci approach mitigates the enforcement of scientific dogma and the perverse incentives in both industry and academia, which have failed in their obligations to public health and scientific progress. So if you want to know more, you can check out the Ethereum Foundation website. Has a bunch of resources on DeSci. So how could it possibly help? Here are some principles that we've come up with. One, diversity of thought. Funding R&D that's not currently fashionable or conflicts with the prevailing dogma. The government and large corporations should not fully control what kind of science gets done. Spread the wealth. We fund young, hungry academics and biotechs rather than the established labs who are great at getting grants like politicians, but less motivated to cure diseases or rock the boat. It's participatory to allow the public, especially scientists, to participate financially, placing bets with their own money on what science they think is undervalued. And highly motivated patient groups can invest in their own cures as well. And I think they will be the greatest power user of this because they have really strong incentives. Market pricing. Markets, as Buffett says, are a voting machine. We allow the wisdom of the crowd to find the meritorious assets and establish a price like we do for every other important thing in society. If we didn't know what the price of rice or oil should be, we would be lost. So why are we not pricing science in a liquid market? It's also to show that a viable alternative is possible. So as the radical socialist said, another world is possible if you dare to imagine it. If we show academics that we can do fast turnaround grant decisions without the bureaucratic headache and fund radical ideas, we'll put pressure on the other existing institutions to do better, and we show it can be done. To resist monopoly, so effective therapies can slip through the cracks or be suppressed because industry doesn't appreciate the approach. And finally, to create a public goods library of IP. So there's no database or network that holds all the world's IP for licensing of projects available to be funded. It's splintered across university websites and grant databases. The patent databases are not very helpful because patents are written to obscure and obfuscate rather than to promote understanding. So how does this work in practice? Hat tip to Nicholas Rintdorf of LabDAO for this thinking here. So there's some functional layers of DeSci. The first is the Web3 infrastructure layer, like what Molecule is building, so creation of new DAOs, establishing the legal templates, industry standards for organizational structure, arbitration of legal disputes, et cetera. They're building an IP marketplace or an eBay for IP so that all pre- and post-patent data is easily searchable and described in a way that is meant to be discovered and licensed. There's another layer, which is the capital allocation layer, like VitaDAO for longevity, ValleyDAO for synthetic biology, SciDAO for psychedelics, Alzheimer's DAO for Alzheimer's, and rare disease DAOs, which I think are going to prove to be the most important in the near term. So it's a lot like a venture fund or a disco, but everybody has a vote, and we assist with new co-formation when the time is right, like we've just done recently with Vera Gorbanova. And then most importantly, the physical execution layer. So LabDAO and various cloud labs are examples of this, where you perform experiments with a maximum level of automation. You use AI to analyze the data, propose new experiments in a closed loop system, and then you output the data into an IP NFT. You can also provide dynamic pricing for CRO services in a marketplace like Science Exchange. Having spent too many years and late nights at the bench myself, I think it is absolutely insane and criminal that we have smart people, creative people doing the work that a robot can do better. Right, so let's do a case study of VitaDAO. Let's start with the social proof. So tweets in support of VitaDAO. Bob Nelson, he is the head of Arch Ventures, which is probably one of the biggest and most radical venture capital funds in the world. He tweeted about us. Balaji as well, one of the big names in crypto, who's also trained as a scientist originally, and Vitalik, of course, inventor of Ethereum, who you all know, who's been supporting us as well. So we've deployed a couple $1 million into 14 projects within the last year. We have a deep bench of a lot of very talented people, and this is growing every day. That's one of the beautiful things about DAOs and crypto is people can just join. It's not like they have to go through some complex HR process, and they don't have to live in any specific country, and they can work whatever hours that they want. It's really attracted a lot of people, and you can get a lot done in nights and weekends of world experts in the field. And so the first IP NFT that we actually funded through VitaDAO was with Morton's lab, our omniscient and benevolent conference organizer, and this is based on really interesting data from the Danish government database of prescription drugs, figuring out which drugs cause people to live longer, kind of like how we discovered metformin was interesting, although those data with life extension with metformin are under dispute. Okay, so here's a sampling of some of the projects we've funded. So we can fund companies via equity, via our nonprofit arm, and we can also fund labs directly through IP NFTs. Victor Korolchuk is working on autophagy enhancement, and he was one of the first we financed. Also, University of Washington, Tim's Biotech, Sen's Foundation, we funded a project on CAR-NK cells, which is really cool. Imperial College London, and a bunch of other groups that we'll get into if you're curious. So one case study of how we can facilitate new spinouts is Matrix Bio, which is Vera's new company on extracellular matrix. So, basically, you guys know about naked mole rats. They live 30 years, even though normal rats live 3. They don't get cancer, and they have a lot of really interesting biology. And Vera has published in Nature a couple years ago that probably one of the main reasons why they don't get much cancer is this very high molecular weight hyaluronic acid, which you've heard about in cosmetics. Actually, when it's in the extracellular matrix, makes it harder for cancer cells to move about and metastasize. And she's shown that if you genetically engineer mice to have some of this benefit, they live 10% longer median lifespan and they get less cancer. And it turns out that there's a druggable target, hyaluronidase 2, which we can inhibit to mimic some of this effect. So she's already found some small molecules that inhibit it, and we're diving deeper into that process to bring it into the clinic. So that's a case study of one of these. And so turning to Molecule is a biotech protocol. It's building the infrastructure around Web3 and BioDAOs. So you guys know about the Valley of Death. There's a lot of capital coming from the NIH, although I'd say not nearly enough. By the way, in the US, the NIH budget is somewhere around $50 billion, but the amount that Americans spend on beer is about $60 billion. So the amount that we spend on beer is significantly more than pretty much all the biomedical R&D government budget. And its NIH budget is about double what the European Union spends on R&D as well. So anyway, there's this Valley of Death, though. So after the basic research, you have all of the early stage drug discovery stuff, and those skills are relatively rare and very risky, and so this is not getting commercialized properly. Something is broken in this step. And so Molecule wants to try to help fix that. One is with the IP NFTs, which I'll get into in detail. Another is with this marketplace for IP, just to make it searchable for philanthropists and VCs and biopharmas. What is all of the IP out there available in one place? And also helping to build new DAOs. So here's a snapshot of the marketplace as it currently exists. You've got a bunch of projects, got the team. You can start to negotiate licensing terms through this platform. If I had this 5 years ago, it would have been a game changer because I had to painstakingly go to universities and conferences, and it was just really not an efficient process. And so IP NFTs, what are they? We'll get into that. Basically, they allow you to own future IP, so you can finance a project and then package the IP into this tradable IP NFT. It includes the license agreement with the university, sub-licenses, and royalty streams paid out through smart contracts. And we'll get into the technicals another time. So IP is the lifeblood of biotech. Without IP and patents, there would be no biotech. But it's arcane. It requires lawyers to transact. You have these 30, 40-page documents of legalese. It's like pulling teeth. It shouldn't be that way. So with an IP NFT, we can create a liquid market for pre- and post-patent IP data packages. We allow price discovery of assets, so how we price commodities or stonks. We want to know what the data is worth. And you would want to know, based on market feedback, whether your data are compelling. It allows asset-based financing. So for example, if I don't want to own the entire Novartis pipeline, but there's one asset in their pipeline that I really like and I want to bet big on, this would allow you to do it. It allows non-dilutive financings as a company. So you basically do a royalty agreement covering this IP rather than selling equity. It creates a new asset class for investors. So investors are always looking to diversify their portfolio. It's said that diversification is the only free lunch in finance. So this is a new type of asset class. And it shows provenance and market-based licensing negotiations. So one example of an IP NFT we've done is Viktor Korolchuk's, which you guys should all check out. Basically, what we do today is we take a legal contract, we put it inside of a smart contract, and then that is made available to the token holders. So anybody who wants to know more has to purchase tokens, and then they can get access. And they can also vote on what is done with that IP, whether we spin it out into a new co, or we license it to a pharma, or what have you. This is a bit about how the process works. You have IP NFT generation before a company is financed. This is kind of the killer experiment stage, and if that works, then you create a company around it. A lot of assets are just too early to justify bringing in a team when you can do a couple, $500,000 worth of experiments, killer experiments before then. All right, so some visions for the future. This is sort of my wish list. Fully automated luxury cloud labs. So smart people waste too much energy doing manual labor that machines can do better. Let's let humans focus on thinking rather than pipetting. Academic, industrial, and CRO partnerships become seamless to launch with clear IP ownership. The good ideas get funded quickly without bureaucracy and politics of grant agencies. We focus on real-world impact rather than Hermann Hesse's glass bead game of publication prestige and academic hierarchy. Dogma itself is inevitable, but perhaps paradigm shifts can happen faster or more easily. Cartelized industry cannot suppress competition or monopolize innovation. It becomes much easier to launch a biotech startup, get access to capital, recruits an expert network through these DAOs, and usually the first money in is the hardest capital to raise. And DeSci organizations lobby governments to reform the law and prioritize innovation in new models of IP and financing R&D. Oops. So the good thing is the cat is out of the bag. The cat is out of the bag with longevity. You see all these big pharmas getting interested and multi-billion-dollar financings happening. So the snowball effect is going there, thankfully. But we can speed it up. But the same is true with Web3 and crypto. It's not going anywhere, and it's going to become embedded in the internet as we know it, the internet of money or value exchange. So I'm optimistic there. This I won't get into, but basically it's a comparison of the merits of the disco model, a term I coined some years ago because amazingly there was no term for this. It was called the hub and spoke model previously. The snack, which is another term I'm coining, which is the single novel asset company. You can bundle a bunch of snacks into a disco. And then the DAO model, which has a lot of other merits. So I invite you to join us. How can you get involved? Longevity Prize, this was announced recently. One of them is the Hypothesis Prize, which is basically, we'll pay you 20 grand for a proposal for a really novel idea for an experiment. So we basically want people to go back through the 100 years of literature that's out there and find all of that hidden, buried gold. One example of this is the work of Irina Conboy at Berkeley when she was in Tom Rando's lab at Stanford. She and others revived the heterochronic parabiosis technique, and that had been done about a century prior, but nobody was doing it in the 2000s, and she brought it back. So I'm sure that there's a lot of other gold waiting to be mined in the literature and in different languages. Briefly, a shout out about my latest company, ImmuneAge Pharma. We're the first drug discovery platform for immune system rejuvenation, focusing on hematopoietic stem cell biology. We're hiring and raising capital, so get in touch. And finally, these are some of the crypto organizations that you should definitely get involved with. And a lot of people from these organizations are here, and they've sponsored the conference as well. So with that, thanks everybody for coming, and yeah, looking forward to a great conference.
Thank you, Sebastian, for this entirely overview of like an entire cosmos. We have time for one question. Who's first?
I can do some dance moves if you insist.
Okay.
If I must.
Dance.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Felix from HTW Berlin. You were talking shortly about wrong incentives currently in research, but I think there's also quite a big problem in the new system you propose. If we're talking about incentives by getting money from patient groups, by getting money from investors who might not be too knowledgeable about bioscience, isn't there a huge risk for a lot of funding for snake oil?
Absolutely, yes. And a lot of crypto has been BS. Previously, VitaDAO is one of the few really legit organizations that I'm aware of. But you know, the same logic applies to public markets, right? You have all of these companies that are overhyped, you know, going public for billions and billions. And so the same logic applies, but we don't say, all right, well, let's not do public market financings because some people may invest unwisely. But yeah, I mean, we're definitely putting in place a lot of systems to ensure that there's honesty and transparency. And in fact, the way we're doing DAOs and IP NFTs, it's more transparent than any other kind of deal, any other kind of structure that currently exists. If you want, and you're a token holder, you can go in and look at the IP NFT data room and look at the data in real time as it's coming out. Public market companies don't allow that. So, but I agree, we've got to be vigilant, not just in the crypto space, but just in longevity overall. Most of us here are OGs. We've been in the field for a long time, but as the hype cycle continues, there are going to be a lot of clout chasers coming in and trying to capitalize on the movement that are not truly longevity biotech companies, right? They don't have lifespan data, or they're not working on hallmarks of aging or whatever. So we've got to do some quality control there. But yeah, thanks for your question.
Luckily, it seems we still have like a lot of problems to solve, so more talent can join and like just manifest all the ideas that we have here.
Yeah.
With that, let's
Cheers.
give a hand to Sebastian and move on to the next talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. For the next talk, we have Garri Zmudze on. He's the founding partner of the VC company Launch VC. He's also the executive coordinator of the Longevity Science Foundation. He's passionate about longevity, aging research, technology, and motivating more people to get actually into the longevity industry. And in his talk, he will be sharing ideas on blockchain-based voting systems and consent management with you. Give him a round of applause. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Thank you.
Stage is yours.
Thank you. Okay, my name is Garri Zmudze, and I'm happy to be here. So I want to talk a little bit about my personal journey in longevity, as well as my participation with the Longevity Science Foundation and other projects in this field. So my biotech journey started with the early stage investment in silico medicine. My close friend Alex, he actually invited me to join the movement back in the days. So I started my angel investments. My first investment was in silico medicine, then followed with deep longevity. I also supported a pet DNA company from the Bay Area called BasePost that was recently acquired by Zoetis. I'm a co-founder of Longenesis, and Longenesis is a startup that we co-founded together with Insilica and Bitfury Group that we already mentioned here, is one of the leading blockchain companies in the world. And the goal for Longenesis is to speed up onboarding of patients for clinical trials using also blockchain for consent management. A year and a half ago, we created Longevity, which is an early-stage investment vehicle. So we invest in seed, pre-seed, and early A rounds of longevity-related startups, both therapeutics and non-therapeutics. And working in this field, we discovered actually that there is a lot of early-stage science which is underfunded. So that's how we came to the idea of a Longevity Science Foundation, which is essentially a non-profit based in Switzerland and in the US. And we have two simple goals for this non-profit. So one is to support early-stage longevity research in a way of non-dilutive grants without claiming for any IP or shareholding. As well as to attract professionals from other fields and to show them with my own example and with example of my colleagues how profitable and impactful can be investments in longevity. So here you can see some people behind the project. So you all know Alex and Professor Matt Kaberle, Evelyn, Michael Levitt. So these guys, they run the visionary board, so they are part of the visionary board, so a little bit how it works. We actually decided to change the traditional non-profit project into a more transparent and auditable way, where every donor gets voting rights. So basically, they decide where the money goes to. So I'll try to explain a little bit how it works. So step one, our visionary boards, they decide which area the foundation will support. And we announce the grant call after we receive an application. And now we have, I think, a little bit more than 300 applications of different early-stage longevity research from the big academia and also small private groups and startups around the globe. So all these applications that are incoming to the foundation, they pass through filter of our analytical team, and then they go for approval for our visionary board members, and then it goes for voting for our donors. So our donors, essentially, they're getting a number of perks in exchange of their support. They're getting tax deductions, they're getting voting rights, so they can vote which projects to support or not. We also partner with NFT artists, so with digital artists that donated their art to the foundation, and we are helping our donors to build for free collections of exclusive NFTs that can be also more than like an appreciation of their donation, but that can be also sold on the secondary market. We give them an access of one-on-one consultations with longevity physicians so they can improve their own lives or lives of their family members. We created a closed pitch club where very early stage startups, they can find angel investors that will support them on the early stage. We are planning an event where we want to educate people and explain them in the simple terms, complicated things. So a little bit more about the funding and NFT. So I think that actually NFT as a digital art, that's just a part of the technology, and we divide our NFT collections in two parts. So one part we actually give for free to our existing donors, And another part we are planning to sell on the market, but there will be some utilities inside these NFTs. For example, ours with our top donors or our visionary board members that people can buy and they can ask questions, they can validate their hypothesis, etc. So our first collection is with a digital artist called R66. His name is Nikita Riplansky, and he was a leading designer in a prosthesis company, so he's got industrial design, and this is an example of collection he's offering, first of all, to his crowd and to supporters that like his art. So that's our first initiative in this field, and we are planning to make this. To make longevity and educate people the more accessible way, so that can be understandable to the broader audience, and that's why we are mostly focused now with so-called traditional donors in the U.S. that donate to nonprofits, and with these perks, we want to help them and to improve their own lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Garri, for giving us an introduction to what's behind the LSF. Any questions for him? Sebastian?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think the scientists in the room would be curious about...
Can you just wait until you have the mic?
Hello? Okay. Yes. Thank you for the presentation. Mostly scientists in the room. They'd be curious about what kind of things you're looking to fund, and if you could talk about the activities of the organization thus far.
Yes, sure. So our first grant call is around aging clocks. So we announced a grant call around this, and we got like a number of applications around aging clocks, because we believe that we must have a mechanism how to track changes, especially when you take some interventions or geroprotectors, etc. And we have plans around mental health, around other areas, but that will be defined by our visionary board members.
Great.
Over there to the left.
The most important question is for which sums we scientists can apply, and for which period of time, and what do we have to provide as grant reporting?
Thank you. So actually there are different numbers. Some of the research groups, they are asking for, I don't know, 10, 20K. Some of them want much more, depending on their program. Yeah, I mean, we give this right to decide to our donors. So we do all the prep work on the analytics, on the approval, and an abstract from the visionary board members, and actually then when they apply, that actually the donors, they decide how much money and which projects to support.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more round of applause. Thank you. Before we move on to the next panel discussion, which will be hosted by Stephanie Dainow. Stephanie, you can stand up. She's the executive director of Lifespan.io. And before she actually joined Lifespan, she was like with Singularity University in the Silicon Valley, working across their innovation consultancy and emerging tech think tanks, and was thinking about how technologies can actually disrupt industries. And she's very passionate about empowering leaders to think differently about emerging technologies, disruption, and the future of business. And yeah, I'm very glad she can be here today and host the next panel discussion on decentralized science and blockchain and aging research with Garri, with Sebastian, and with Tim, who's there. And yeah, the show is yours.
Hello, hello. Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me. And I'm here on behalf of Lifespan.io. We're a US nonprofit, 501c3. We're focused on helping accelerate the progress of everybody here, whether that's through media, advocacy, crowdfunding, different kinds of trials, or the news. And so anyways, I'm really looking forward to diving into this emerging tech. Please, you guys want to have a seat? How's everyone doing today? Energy. All right. So let's basically zoom out a bit, right? Emerging technology really comes from some people looking at a problem differently. And so I want to go back in history and what were some of the key pivot moments where Web3, decentralized science, NFTs, crypto, that started coming into fruition?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, it's so new that I think we're still making history. Some of the stuff that we've done at VitaDAO thus far, we funded a whole lot of projects that probably would have been hard to get funding for otherwise because they were too radical for the NIH to fund, for example, and certainly too radical for Big Pharma to fund and too early. One of the cool watershed moments, I think, was partnering VitaDAO with Apollo Health Ventures, which I think is one of the smartest and, again, the second coolest aging-focused VCs several months ago, as well as, I guess this is public information at this point, Pfizer, the big pharma Pfizer Ventures is partnering with and investing in VitaDAO's next financing round. They're one of the institutions leading the next round. So it kind of blew me away that, within 1 year, even these very traditional risk-averse entities like big pharmas, and we've spoken with other big pharmas like Novartis, are catching on. So, I think history, it rhymes, but the big pharmas are pretty quick on the uptake. I mean, I kind of dunk on big pharma all the time because they're very slow on recognizing new approaches. So, for example, immune oncology, which is the hottest area of biopharma today, with the checkpoint inhibitors and the adoptive cell therapies, pharma was really slow on the uptake. There's a really good documentary that everybody should see. It's called Breakthrough, about Jim Allison, which is a Nobel laureate for the checkpoint inhibitor work, CTLA-4. I saw it on the plane, and I literally cried seeing it because it was so moving, and I was just so disappointed by how hard of a struggle he and others have had in getting pharma's attention. So there's a huge bottleneck there. So hopefully pharma is kind of learning from the history, outsourcing more of their R&D, and the earliest stages of it can be done by DAOs like VitaDAO.
Maybe more generally, I think, obviously cryptos, we owe it all to kind of Bitcoin with the idea, Satoshi, and this, the concept of peer-to-peer money, essentially. And then I think with Ethereum, the rise of Ethereum and other blockchain platforms, there's just been an opportunity to do more than just money. And so obviously money and incentives are kind of key to everything. And as I talked about earlier in my talk, just the lack of incentives, the lack of kind of monetization, the lack of liquidity, as Sebastian mentioned with IP NFTs, there's just the money is not always aligned with what we're doing, a lot of our activities. So the ability of smart contracts and crypto to kind of take on more properties than just being a peer-to-peer money transfer is been key to that. And so and NFTs started as just pictures of silly pictures of aliens or whatever, and of course they can hold much more than just kind of silly gimmicky type things. But often in terms of innovation, what most people, Paul Graham has described, that things start off as toys, right? They start off heavily discredited. They're kind of almost embarrassing in terms of their early forms, and so it's people like Vitalik and Buterin who helped co-create Ethereum and other folks like that who really just didn't pay attention and then just kind of kept building. And I think we're we've gotten some early validation with Pfizer, and that's phenomenal. But I think ultimately you just have to kind of keep building, and people that will disregard it as a toy, or we don't have we're not touting our Harvard name brand all the time or whatever. You just got to kind of keep plugging away, and ultimately just keep building, and that's how you make the change. So.
On that point, people said the same thing about longevity biotech as well.
Yeah.
10 years ago when I got in the field, it was super fringe. You would not have big pharmas or VCs of any description really showing up at the conferences. You'd have early adopters like Peter Thiel and Aubrey de Grey, and Bob Nelson, actually, to his credit, was early. But now it's gained this reputability that I would not have predicted in such a fast period of time. And with IP NFTs and NFTs in general, I think it's likely that all assets will be instantiated in an NFT or some sort of tradable entity at some point in the future. To give you another example, real estate, right? If I want to build hyper-local real estate portfolio, I want a fractional share of this hotel that I really love or this neighborhood that I really like. You can't do that today. The closest you can get is a REIT. But in the future, we can put all kinds of assets on the blockchain. I think it's inevitable.
I'd like to say.
Funding models?
Yeah, I mean, first about early stage investments, I think we can write a book together with Alex Javarenkov, how many times while fundraising for in silico medicine we had total declines of the investors community, right? This is first. And about talking about blockchain, so we started Longenesis, and initially the idea for the Longenesis was that people that are sharing their medical data, they're getting paid for this, they're getting paid by the token, and that was a lot of hype around this. But looking at the whole ecosystem, actually we realized that was too early for this type of projects back in the days, and we decided to transfer the company to an IT company. And basically what Longenesis does now is we don't hold healthcare data, we hold the anonymized metadata. But when the clinical research organization or study sponsor comes and he wants to get the cohort of patients for clinical trials, it's easier and very quickly he can get the cohort, and using our consent management tool that's auditable and transparent. So I think that's the real implementation of the blockchain technology without any, hype around tokenization, etc. I think that's a very natural case for using blockchain.
So with respect to what Sebastian mentioned, how longevity is really accelerating in the field quicker than you even expected, but even at Singularity University, what we talked about is the fact that exponential technologies are accelerating and converging. And because of the converging aspect, there's a lot of disruption. And so a lot of these ideas do still seem far off because we have these social constructions that are deeply integrated into our systems to just say, that's not familiar to me, that'll happen when it happens. But the reality is these technologies are happening now. Like, this is no longer, something that will happen in the future. This is active today. And as you guys described, there are a lot of different initiatives that are taking place. And so before I continue, I just wanted to ask a quick question. Before the conversations that were had right before this panel, how many of you really understood the fundamentals of blockchain technologies, crypto, NFTs, decentralized science, just by a raise of hands? Okay, so
5%.
I want to maybe change the direction of this conversation to go back to the fundamentals, to really give you guys an understanding of the basics, because the goal here is for you to walk away from this conference and be able to articulate to your teams, hey, we should be paying attention to this, we should be leveraging these technologies, because ultimately what we want to do is continue accelerating the progress in the longevity space. And so with that said, there's something else that is important to mention, and the reason for the acceleration is also the narrative, okay? it doesn't matter how good science is, if you can't articulate it in a certain way to a respective audience, it's not going to really make much progress or difference. And so with that said, I would love to hear more about some of the challenges that you expect for your respective organizations from a narrative perspective. Because let's say the universities come back and basically argue, well, you know, we want the IP, so we don't want to talk about IP NFTs or the funding mechanism. So how would you respond to that based on, let's just assume everyone here is in kindergarten, let's speak in ABCs.
Yeah, sure. So regarding the DTT model and crypto broadly, it's all about democratizing the system. And the beauty of the DTT is it puts a lot more agency in the hands of the scientists, not just the PI, but also more junior scientists in the lab, because all we need to do is sign a consulting agreement with them, and then they help us to launch a company. So there's really not that much that the universities can do to, you know, extract their rent-seeking pound of flesh, though I'm sure they will try. We haven't run into that much yet. There's something I want to point out just before I forget, if I may, which is I think the power users of Web3 BioDAOs will be people with life-threatening, rapidly progressing, and rare genetic diseases. We already see this. One organization is called Fleming Protocol, in which you know, there are people who have, or their children have, a serious disease that is being neglected by the existing entities in the system, usually because the disease is just too rare. It's below the threshold of the number of patients that you need for pharma to be attracted by the profit potential. But you can run, and thank God for FDA and EMA changing their policies here, you can run relatively small, low bureaucracy clinical trials in these patients with rare genetic diseases and get approval and conditional approval based on that data relatively cheaply. And this is being done in sort of a disorganized, unstructured way today, where you'll have groups you know, forming a nonprofit, philanthropic group for some rare disease X, and they will raise money from philanthropists and run a trial. But what if we could pool, say there are 10,000 people with a certain rare disease on Earth, and they can pool their capital and do preclinical research, run clinical trials, and even get approval, regulatory approval. And with that data package, now they have marketing exclusivity on a new use of a known molecule, for example, a generic drug that's been repurposed or a cocktail thereof. And they can sell those rights to a generics company or some pharma company and recoup their cost of running the trial and potentially profit on some multiple of that. And so we already have examples of this working successfully. One is the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, which by some accounts is too successful. They financed research that later became a multi-billion-dollar drug developed by Vertex Pharmaceuticals, and there are several books about this. And then they become very cozy with Vertex lately, which has kind of stalled progress. But this is an example of where when you have one early success, you know, this nonprofit entity, it now has a treasury of billions. And so we can do that on a larger scale with many different diseases, I think. So getting this up and running in the rare disease community is going to be one of the key objectives.
I think that that's important, the incentive for anyone that wants to support the movement. And here we built a lot of perks in Longevity Science Foundation. We're not claiming for IP, because actually some of the researchers that they don't want to commercialize, they want to make it open source, and they don't care about intellectual property. They want the results as well as we do. So I think the biggest challenge is to make a proper incentive mechanism for each participant. So I think that's the biggest challenge. So that's why actually we have different perks. Some of people we are providing with longevity physician consultations if they're interested. Some of other people, they're interested in art from these NFT artists. Other people, they want to build their own pipeline of angel investments. So that's how it's structured. So we want to give incentive, and I think that's the key now, the incentive mechanism for our field.
Okay. So just because of the poll we did earlier, before I continue asking my questions, do we want a definition of, another definition of DAO or NFT or understanding of how the blockchain actually works, or the blockchain technologies? I'm seeing a couple nods, but I need more consensus. Yes, okay. So can you guys tell us the fundamentals of blockchain technology, right? The blockchain itself is a technology, and there are different iterations of it. And the idea is that there's transparency, there's voting, and it is, in fact, decentralized as its nature, right? And that ties into some of the challenges that you discussed after my first question. But what does it actually look like, and how do people engage hands-on?
Sure. So like the internet, as Al Gore famously said, it's just like a series of tubes, basically. That's what the blockchain is. Just kidding. So this is sort of probably beyond my pay grade, but it's basically taking money in value exchange and putting it in a decentralized ledger. Banks basically have ledgers that keep track of who owes what, and we're just doing that in a decentralized way. You have all these computers all over the world.
Can I actually pause you for a second? All right, imagine this, a Google Doc, Google spreadsheet, right? And you can track the changes that are made, and there are three components with blockchain. You can add, you can modify, or you can remove. The difference between blockchain technologies in this ledger and Google Docs as kind of a decentralized application is?
Well, you can keep track of who owes what. It's totally transparent. And it basically potentially takes money out of the hands of governments, which the early Bitcoin enthusiasts, including people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, wanted to create some non-governmental money aside from gold, and Bitcoin promises to be something like that. We'll see if it happens. But we can also use it to finance research, and that's mostly what we've focused on thus far. There's an important definition, which is the DAO. I think a year or two ago, I think it was Andreessen Horowitz said it was the year of the DAO. What is a DAO? It is not the ancient Chinese idea, but it is a decentralized autonomous organization. So it's basically just a new sort of corporate structure that doesn't exist in any particular country or jurisdiction. And it's much more democratic. So all of the employees or co-owners have tokens, and they can vote with those tokens on the activities of the DAO. So unlike big corporations or big government entities, which are sort of cloaked and not very transparent and accountable, DAOs have to be. So hopefully that's helpful. And the Vita DAO is probably the premier longevity DAO, if not the only, and one of the most legit funding-oriented DAOs in existence. So
maybe one clarification on the blockchain, right? There's multiple copies. They're synchronized around the world. That's a fundamental difference with the Google spreadsheet. And of course, what that allows is then you can't just, one person can't just go in and kind of change the entities without, everyone kind of verifying that change. So, permissionless, it, of course, it's disseminated broadly. Permanence, those types of features make it unique, and because it's not just money flowing from A to B, you can have all kinds of logic about how the money flows. It can be much more sophisticated than just the simple peer-to-peer money exchange as was originally imagined. I think probably the biggest thing, the series of tubes analogy. Of course, one of the big first things that came out of the internet was email addresses. So essentially, what a lot of us are interested in essentially is having a wallet address. So a wallet address that looks like an email address, and then it's can be a bunch of characters that may or may not make sense to you. But essentially, of course, we own our wallet addresses. We're the only ones who have the kind of private keys to those. The same way with the email addresses. And the fundamental difference, right, is your email address. You own it. Everyone in the world may know it. Elon at Tesla.com, right? I mean, that's if you controlled that, you would have a lot of money. But the fundamental difference is, in the case of a wallet address, you actually do control your money. So you can tie your reputation and the money together into your wallet. And this whole identity layer, I think, is going to be shift from email addresses to wallet addresses, and that's how kind of value will be propagated in this kind of third version of the internet. So.
Yeah, I believe with nonprofits there are two key words That's transparency and auditability. That's something that traditional nonprofits, they don't have.
Auditability?
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yes, because that's not transparent, and usually donors, they don't have any rights. They have only right not to donate next year, right? That's it. But here we give them the steering wheel, and I think that in our case, blockchain is very natural here, so that's really needed.
So realistically, what we're seeing right now is that you can create your own new identity on the blockchain, and that is who you are. And everything that you do on that technology is captured, and it is stored forever. If you make a change to something, that is noted. Or there are mechanisms that will forbid you from making that change, and it will still notate that you tried. And all of that information is public. And now all that information is also copied multiple times all over the place. So everyone has versions of this history, of this reality. And so everyone is kind of watching each other. And I know it sounds nuanced, but the technologies have been improving, and people have been working on this for several years now. And so if you imagine into the future, right, even though this is happening now, what is the future version of this as it relates to your organizations? And you talked a little bit about what your wish list would be, but from a transactional perspective, from how the audience is actually engaging with these technologies, what does that look like?
Sure. Well, the long-term vision would be we're pooling so much capital into these DAOs, like VitaDAO, that it almost competes with the NIH and government funding agencies as a funding source. And we have some years to get there, but there's a huge amount of capital available in the crypto world that we should really try to funnel into the most productive possible uses. As for most of the people at the conference here who are scientists, VitaDAO wants to fund your research. We fund largely translational drug discovery research in the long bio field, but we're also interested in funding basic research as well as clinical trials. So definitely just reach out to the people at VitaDAO, and we're interested in funding you. And we're much faster in issuing grants than government funding bodies as well, which is another perk. And we help you to promote your research as well. So you can do a presentation to the VitaDAO community. We have thousands and thousands of people involved already and quite a wide reach on the internet. So it's a great way to get your research out there, to find collaborators and so on.
Garri, what about as it relates to your funding models from a nonprofit perspective?
I'm thinking more about education, about explaining people complicated things with the more simple terms. And I believe that with our project, we want actually to cover all the audiences, like traditional donors, as well as crypto guys, because we have this ability also to accept donations in crypto through Giving Block, which is another big aggregator for nonprofits. There must be a lot of education. We must get rid of perception that longevity is same as biohacking or other terms. So there's a lot of education needed, and I believe projects like VitaDAO, Molecule, LSF, we were created for this, to educate more people and to get more people on board.
Yeah.
I think.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
So I think language is super important, and I see my friend Matt Kaberlin has arrived, and he has put forth this important point, which is the language that we use to talk about geroscience. We shouldn't call it a geroscience hypothesis, as is often done, but something else, because the data are in. It's not hypothetical at this point. Maybe the geroscience paradigm or something like that. And when we're talking about the companies in the space, I like to use long bio because it makes it a thing in the eyes of potential investors. So when you talk to investors, they always want to be early to stuff. Some of the best returns are just being early. And so if you say, hey, there's a new thing, a new investment theme, or people who want to join companies in this space, just sort of making that sort of a branded entity, something very specific, I think will be helpful.
Yeah, there's something else, at Lifespan.io, I don't know, most of you might know my colleague Keith Comito, but he is kind of he's a Web3 pioneer. He's invented a lot of technologies related to DeSci, and the organization basically funds numerous projects in this regard, such as a forthcoming trial for dementia remediation therapies. And so I want to pivot a little bit into what the trials of the future look like as it relates to decentralized science and what the incentive structures are and the funding mechanisms. And just keep in mind, at the end of the day, all of the blockchain is it's a foundation for all this activity to occur on. It is a technology. And then the token is a method of, it's a currency, essentially, that it's like, okay, we're gonna do ABCs for kindergarten right now. We as humans, we live on planet Earth and we engage with cash, okay? And planet Earth is the blockchain and cash is tokens. Okay, so that's the analogy. And so because of all the infrastructure that has been continuously being improved, it actually functions a lot better than you might think. And there are a lot of stigmas and controversies around it, but with each challenge, there's also a new solution that's being presented. And so a lot of that is being dealt with across all of our organizations right now. But I do want to go back into decentralized trials and transparency and being able to accelerate time to market, commercialization, funding mechanisms. All of it is connected in how you learn about what all these emerging techs are. And one other thing, the narrative again matters. So if you want to go back to your teams and talk about, hey, we should look into this. One of the challenges with the longevity space is that right now I can go to people and say, hey, I work in longevity, and some of them will say, oh, that means Botox. I'm like, not exactly. Oh, that means you want to live forever, and you're selling me on Santa Claus as a real human being. So I caution you to be careful about how you articulate the messaging, not even just about longevity, but also about these new emerging technologies, because remember, the audiences will respond differently, and that's why we want to talk, even with clinical trials, decentralized clinical trials, as Sebastian mentioned, the first focus, the most relevant and realistic target is rare diseases. Why? Because rare diseases are what people are suffering from now. It's tangible, it's relatable. Okay, people want to invest in it. If you have a child that's suffering from a rare disease, you're going to do whatever it takes to try and help them. So again, just keep this as a framing for how you start articulating. But please, the panel, you guys know best.
Just briefly on dealing with longevity skeptics, they seem increasingly endangered species, fortunately, but about biological immortality, we already know that it's physically possible for cells to be immortal. The germline is immortal, so the reproductive cells that came from your parents' germline, reproductive sperm and egg, they came from stem cells that came from their zygote or embryo that came from their parents and their parents and their parents, all the way back to the dawn of life on this planet. So we know that it's physically possible. It's not a matter of entropy or something. Cellular immortality is possible, and in some ways cancer cells are sort of immortal as well. So that's one thing I would say to the biological immortality skeptics. As for expediting clinical trials, well, I've sort of had a bit of a vantage point in the biopharma world, and I kind of had this terrifying realization that there are very few adults in the room. There's nobody really steering the ship. And the types of clinical research that pharma does is really just targeting a small, small fraction of all of the diseases that are out there. And before some regulatory changes in the rare disease space that really incentivized this area, they were not dealing with rare diseases at all. So the point is there's really a huge amount of white space. There's a huge amount of open territory, and these rare diseases are a good example of that. In aging and age-related diseases are an example too. And one reason why it makes sense to go after aging is because if you can slow the aging process and you can enhance robustness or resilience in animals and extend wild-type animal healthy lifespan, that's not a contrived animal model of disease. So a lot of the reasons, the main reason, according to Jack Scannell, why biopharma R&D is failing so much is because our animal models of disease are contrived and unrealistic to the human case. Think about Mouseheimers with the Alzheimer's Aduhelm amyloid beta debacle. And so if we can drug aging, that is relatively conserved across species. We're not genetically engineering the animals to have some weird thing. And therefore, that drug is more likely to work in humans. As for running a longevity clinical trial, that's probably going to take too long. Maybe these biomarkers, this latency to first to second morbidity will work, like with the TAME trial. But the real strategy is label expansion. So if you have a drug that extends healthy lifespan in animals and works in a bunch of different animal models of disease, contrived as they may be, that's likely to work across many diseases in humans, and you can do what pharma already does today, which is label expansion. So you show that it works in one disease, maybe cancer, you show it works in cardiovascular disease, and then diabetes, and so on, until you've hit the major killers. And so, blockchain fitting into that, DAO is ready to fund a lot of that undone research, and I think there's going to be a huge rush of new organizations funding this research.
Garri, what are your thoughts on decentralized trials as it relates to the nonprofit sector?
I'm a fan of different approaches, including this. So we at Longevity Science Foundation, we are trying to cover all of them, including decentralized trials as well, and I think there's a great future.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing, one thing maybe to add is maybe not really blockchain specific, but of course, due to COVID, a lot of trials have gone remote, so kind of reducing the cost of the trials due to, not necessarily having to bring patients into the hospital, but allowing them to do, do the test wherever they are on Earth or within a country. So. We haven't talked about this kind of pay for success model. It's a new model also is being promoted where whoever would get benefit from the trial results should pay for that. So for example, big employers would want to pay to have their employees be healthier, and so there's models. Crowdfunded Cures is an organization which is kind of pioneering this pay for success approach to clinical trials, and that's where, a big employer, for example, would be interested in having their patients be healthier, and so they would pay potentially for a trial of a drug, of an off-patent drug to see whether it worked or not. So a rare disease, I think, like has already been said, is a great source, a great spot for a lot of this stuff to get off the ground. Ethan Perlstein is a big advocate in the rare disease space. Definitely reach out to him and look up Pearl Era. He's probably one of the big leaders in the space. So, yeah.
Okay. So switching gears, you were talking about DTT and the tech transfer, and you mentioned, Tim, that a researcher would be a consultant, and you also talked about the respective value prop, and there are structural action items to bring this vision to fruition. And it kind of sounds complicated, but I imagine it might be easier than it sounds. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on kind of a to-do list for a researcher to actually bring this idea of DTT to life.
Sure. Yeah. So we've done a couple of these deals already. And to show you what it looks like in practice, the academic founders, professors, postdocs, et cetera, receive equity in this company. It's a real-world entity, Delaware C Corp or what have you. And we sign a consulting agreement with you to support the company on the scientific advisory board. And then we contract with CROs, contract research organizations, to do the early-stage drug discovery. And we also are setting up sort of a vanguard of academic institutions where we have sort of institution-wide agreements where we can, on predetermined terms, financing and licensing terms, perform research in the labs of anybody at that institution, and then they would have equity in the company as well. So it's basically just a way of taking advantage of all of the excess capacity, all of the unused equipment and gray matter, all of the brains that are not fully occupied at the moment. And so, we did it with Vera Gorbanova in the extracellular matrix space, and we've got a bunch of other projects in the pipeline. So it's actually much less bureaucratic than doing the traditional sponsored research agreement and license agreement with a university, which I've done too many than I would like. It's like pulling teeth. It could take 6 months or a year to just get a simple contract signed with these universities. And so I think that's one of the major bottlenecks, and this seems to work so far.
Maybe one thing to add is that, the universities, often the key experiments haven't been done. There may be some thought about, oh, well, we already have what's IP, you got to go through our university. Well, it's not, usually that IP is pretty tenuous, so I think there's value in just kind of starting clean, kind of extricating the researcher from their institution and kind of creating the IP de novo in the NUCO. So.
Yeah, a lot of it is because professors like Tim and others have been sort of held back and slowed down and frustrated by their tech transfer offices, which have perverse incentive structures. So we want to liberate the academics to be able to launch companies really efficiently. And in some places, they've got a good pipeline, Boston, San Francisco, San Diego. They kind of know what they're doing, but it's a big world out there, and this model could probably expedite it.
Not always at those places, yeah.
So we have about 5 minutes left, and there are plenty of questions that I could ask, but as we've all realized, there's a lot to learn here. And so you guys have a fantastic panel up here, and honestly, the organizations that they're representing right now are not your traditional organizations, or if they are, they're leveraging these techs. So I'm wondering if we can actually spend the next few minutes asking the audience what they want to know.
I've got one for you guys. Hey, so it seems that a real keystone for all the DAO model in general is the tokenization of the IP itself. And I mean, from kind of painful experience, I can say that having a patent isn't super valuable if you can't defend it. There's a lot of large companies that run roughshod over smaller entities and individuals. So if I hatch up an idea and I assign the IP and it gets tokenized here, like how does one go about defending that, like local, especially on a kind of a global stage when you have disclosed effectively the things that make it work and whether a patent is even granted or not? Like how does this get managed practically?
Sure. Yeah, we're not reinventing the wheel on patent prosecution or defense. We use the standard law firms. We intend to litigate just like anyone else. But there is a longer-term vision for the future, which is maybe one day we don't have to go through the rigmarole of patents, and we can just have IP NFTs. Like with royalty rights for music, for example, this is already being done. And through smart contracts, it would be possible to determine who is infringing upon that IP. Of course, that's fairly far in the future because you still need states, you need governments to enforce these decisions, but in the near term, yeah, we're not reinventing the wheel, but I would love to see some kind of major change to the patent system because there's a really interesting book. It's called Against Intellectual Monopoly by Boldrin and Levine, who are Federal Reserve economists, and they make the case that actually the patent system is holding back way more innovation than it's promoting. And I can give you one example of this. If you are a professor and you generate IP at your university, you file a patent, which is usually filed prematurely, so this clock starts ticking prematurely, and that patent is not licensed within 2 or 3 years, the probability that it will ever be licensed decreases exponentially, asymptotes to 0, because the clock is ticking and it goes stale. And so we're actually inadvertently taking a torch to all of the corpus of intellectual property innovation and burning it, after it's 3 or 4 years old. And this is a disaster. So I see this all the time. There are drugs that could work to cure cancer, and yet, the patent is stale and people aren't very interested. I'm on the board of a company with an Alzheimer's drug like this now. I mean, it's not that stale, but it's a little stale. And so that's really been a challenge. So I would love, you guys are smart, we've got a brain trust here, for you guys to think of ways we could disrupt the existing intellectual property system.
And maybe just one thing, analogy to make it clear, fully agree with what Sebastian said. I think currently we're basically seeing the situation kind of like Netflix, in the year 2000, they were shipping DVDs around. So I think the patents are kind of the equivalent of the DVDs, and in the future we'll have streaming of patents where kind of access will be controlled and a much more much more liquidity around how the thing works. And so currently we got DVD players, we got to play DVDs. So that's the way it goes. So. Yeah, I think in future patents won't exist, and they'll be controlled through crypto mechanisms. Yep.
Thanks for your question, Matt.
Sorry, it's not a question, but it's more than a comment. So can I?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I just want to add a comment about the perception or the awareness of the society about the longevity medicine. I give you an example in my country, for example. I'm living in Iraq. I'm a nutritionist medical doctor. Whenever I go to any...
Where?
Yeah, can you
We didn't
repeat
hear.
that?
Iraq.
Oh, cool. Wow.
Okay, so people, they don't know anything about longevity. 99% of even the doctors, most of the doctors, they confuse about the longevity and anti-aging. They think it's just a cream, as you said, and it will remove the wrinkles. And whenever I go, for example, and ask for a donation or for some investment in a small clinic, I mean, for nutrition and healthy science, and they say, okay, if I put the money in, then does it remove the wrinkles? I say, come on, you have to first to improve your arteries. This is the first step. We have to increase the age of your heart or of your blood vessels, the brain, these things. So I think unless we can do something in science, a very dramatic step towards the rejuvenation of the skin, we cannot convince the society about the longevity medicine and these things. Because everybody, they think, even if you have, for example, in my practice, we know that about the drugs and the healthy science, metformin, for example, intermittent fasting, and myself, I have dramatic change or transformation in my health. But still, when they ask me, okay, why your wrinkles did not go away? This is the problem. That's why.
Yeah, just to riff on that, a lot of people kind of look down their nose at cosmetic applications. And the point I think you make rightly is when we do have therapies that are shown in clinical trials to improve cosmetic aging, everyone is going to pay a lot of attention to that. So I don't look down my nose at cosmetics at all.
Turn Bio.
Yeah, Turn Bio is working on rejuvenating the skin as well. So yeah, but the language we use is really important. So we, as a community, some years ago, tried to avoid the term anti-aging because there's an existing niche of medical doctors who provide not very well-established, scientifically established interventions around that moniker. And so terms like geroscience or rejuvenation or long bio, I think, are fresh new things that sort of distinguish us a bit from what's come before. And the first thing I say to anybody who's new to this space, first thing out of my mouth is, we can already extend the healthy lifespan of mice by up to about 30%. And those interventions can be combined for potential synergy, and we're just getting started. The ITP NIA program is sort of the gold standard of longevity or lifespan studies, and they're only doing a handful of compounds per year, right? So we're really just at the early inning of all of this. So directing them to those resources, I think, might help.
Yeah, I think it's a chicken and egg syndrome also. Do we need more funding and more attention to be able to accelerate progress and developments, or do you need to have that breakthrough and then everyone will start paying attention? And so from lifespan.io perspective, we want to make longevity mainstream through the narrative and the media. And so that's what I'll be working on. I actually just stepped in as the ED about a month ago, and I've been on the board for a year. So stand by for that. But if you want to know more about how to help the nonprofits who are trying to push this forward, please come to myself and Garri. But beyond that, it's not just the aging problem that we have to solve, it is the narrative. And if we continue to just say, hey, we want to live forever, we want to reverse aging, if you're talking to the people who are going to be resistant, you're not going to get anywhere. So just please be mindful, because if one ship rises, we all rise here. And I want to, with that, thank the panel for being here today. Thank you, ARDD, for having all of us. And I know that there's a bunch of workshops coming up. Also, one other point for the gentleman who just made the comment regarding clinics. We have a wonderful person. Her name is Eva Bischoff. She is here. She's doing the Longevity Medical Day, essentially, and I think she can give you some perspective as well.
Perfect. I think with that, let's rise together, the entire field. And thanks for the panelists. But also thank you, Stephanie, for doing a fantastic job.
Thank you.
As hosting the session.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you very much.
There are like
Thank
two things still going on right now before you jump to the food. Outside is like, if you go up the stairs, you can get like a hands-on thing where you get your gait analyzed, and you will have like a short session on like that Tim will guide on a decentralized review. And then after that, we can like grab food and outside our tables.
Hello. So the people that want to join that, that's really fantastic. The rest of us, or the people that don't want to do that, can go and grab food, and we don't have that much time because we got to go back and be part of the Longevity Medicine Day that starts at 1 p.m. So, but thank you so much for the Longevity Tech, Emerging Tech workshop. It's been fantastic. Thank you so much.
And we're gonna have now like a break until 10:30.